Hello, I'm Liz Hutton. First off, I want to apologize for not being there in person. We're expecting a new addition to our family in just a few weeks, and per doctor recommendation, it wasn't a very good idea to be traveling. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Irina Sindler project and the Life in a Jar book that most of you have been reading. And first off, thank you for taking interest in the project and taking interest in the book, and I really hope you enjoyed the story that you read. The theme is Ripple of Hope, and I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit. This whole entire project has been hopeful for me in many ways, personally, and even as I'm growing as an adult and growing my family. But I'll start from when we first started the project. If you've read the book, then you kind of already know all the secrets in my struggle in life. And if you haven't read it, I won't give too much away, but I had to grow up with my grandparents. My mom was a drug addict, my dad was an alcoholic, and those combinations weren't good for raising children. So my grandparents, my dad's parents, raised me, and it was a good life for sure. But I definitely struggled throughout high school. High school is a rough time anyway, trying to figure out who you are, what you want to be, all those fun things. But for somebody who didn't have a traditional family, the pressure's on even more. I didn't have a choice about going to college or anything like that. I had to go, but trying to make the right decisions in high school to make sure you can go to college can be overwhelming. So my freshman year of high school is when I heard about the History Day competition, and I thought that sounded really neat, and so some girls and I put together a group. We wanted to focus on the Holocaust, and our teacher had some potential History Day project ideas, and we sifted through those and found which ones were Holocaust related. And he had actually put this particular one on top and said, why don't you look into this a little bit? And so we had read the article. The article had said other Schindlers, and some of them we had heard of, some of them we hadn't. But Irina Sindler really stuck out because it said she had saved 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto alone. And we thought, man, this must be a typo. Something isn't quite right here. Nobody's heard of her. We tried to Google her. And nothing really came up, and so we weren't really sure, but we were still very interested, even though our research at the very beginning kind of dropped off and was at a standstill. But we definitely wanted to learn more, and so that's how the project kind of blossomed from there. As we delved deeper into the research of the project, we realized how important that her story was to us and how her saving all these children were to each of us individually. And again, if you read the book, you know all about that. For me, trying to figure out who I was in high school and what I wanted to do, the most important thing that I took from the project at first was how these Jewish mothers could give up their children. And me, that was my story. My mom had to give me up. And so I tried to, instead of being bitter about the situation of, my mom gave me up and, I don't have this traditional family, it changed my perspective into more of, well, maybe she had to give me up for me to have a better life. And so that started my journey on this road of hope in my personal life and helped me kind of switch my mentality. And so for me personally, that's why this project was so important, was I wanted to read more stories and more stories about how each of these families, mothers in particular, were able to give up their children. For the project in its entirety, we have some very specific places I can remember when we did our performance that also had this hope theme. Several in particular, but 3 I want to focus on for the Ripple of Hope theme. The first one that comes to mind was the 9/11 events. We had already been scheduled to perform in the Kansas City area for the Jewish community on September 12th, 2001. Well, on September 11th, everything changed. And we weren't even sure if we wanted to travel and go up to Kansas City, because we were thinking that they wanted to be together and maybe have a service at their synagogue together, rather than have this group of teenagers come up and tell them about this Holocaust story. So Tuesday morning we called up to the area we were going to perform, and we said, hey, if you want to cancel on us, we totally understand. If you guys just need to be together and come together as a community, we understand. And they didn't have anything to do with it. They said, no, we need you to come up. We need to hear this story. Out of everything going on right now, we need to hear this story of hope. And originally we had about 300 people RSVP for the event, and that's about how many people could be held in the complex anyway. But when we got up there were over 600 people. It was standing room only, and that just gave you that sense of hope that they needed to hear this story, that out of this whole entire time, that's what they needed to hear, was the story of a lady who saved Jewish people and give them a different perspective of the day's events. Another presentation that we did was when we went to Poland. It was our third trip, I believe, when we went and performed for a group of Holocaust survivors. There's no words to describe how you're telling their story right in front of them. But even after all those years, these children who had survived the Holocaust, they had their stories. Some they had shared with others, some they just kept to themselves. But they showed up to hear their own story, and that was very impactful. After our performance, people came up to us and talked about, that was me, that child was me, that's my experience, and just to listen to their story and see their eyes light up, but in a positive, hopeful manner of, thank you for bringing this story to us, and thank you for sharing Irina's story. And then another, it's not necessarily a performance we did, but whenever we went to Poland for our very first time, we had no idea what to expect. Whenever we got off the plane, there were all these people who had come to see us and interview us, news, media, radio, and we were really shocked of, like, why in the world? We thought we were famous being 16 years old and getting off the plane, and here all these media people are. At first we're like, who's on our plane? Somebody famous, and they were there for us. But what we didn't know is that they had printed a 2-page news article about us coming over and why we were there. And they wanted to hear this story of these American teenage girls from nowhere, Kansas, telling this story. They had recently discovered a horrible story of their own people in Poland who had killed some Jewish people in a barn. That story had come out right before we had been to Poland. And, that's horrible when you find out stuff like that of your history. And so a few weeks later, our story came out of, actually, there are good people still. And this one was in particular Polish as well. Irina, she saved these children, and she did the good deed that they were hoping for. Also, something that is really interesting with Irina is that with all these children that she saved, 2,500, the impact for today is overwhelming. We still need to hear these stories. Just as much as we do back then, we need to hear it today. Just last night, there were protests in St. Louis area. So we still need to hear these stories of hope. But something that's really interesting is that the 2,500 children that she saved, if all of them had children, and those children had children, we're looking at around 10,000 people that she ultimately saved. And more, as long as they keep, having families. And so to see that not only did she save those 2,500 children, she also saved those next generations. And that is also a huge story of hope in itself. We need to bring this message of hope today because of everything that's going on in our own country. But even though the story is of a World War II heroine, this story can be your own story. As people, we are to bring hope for others. The definition of hope is actually to trust in or expect something beneficial. And so it's not really a verb in a sense, but I think as people we can make it a verb. The world's looking for hope. They want to see good in people. And when you turn on the TV, that's not what we see. But if you turn off those things, you look in your own town, you look at your neighbor, we together can bring hope. We can make this a verb. We can actually be those ripples of hope to bring to other people. If we're going to expect it, then we also need to be able to provide it. And so that's my message for you today, and I encourage you to continue reading the book if you haven't finished it. Grab it, read it if you haven't even started it. Send me emails if you need questions answered. And again, I apologize for not being there in person, but I'm looking forward to meeting you and hearing your guys' stories too. Thank you.